Hi, can you hear me? Yes, thank you. Welcome to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us today. We are extremely excited for this side event. This is our first side event in person after the pandemic started. So it is a real special moment for all women's major group, for all colleagues that you are here today with us. So in addition, we are super grateful to all of the people who have decided to join us today, some in person, other online. Welcome to the people attending online, also our site event. And before to start, I think it's very important to share a very amazing news, a very good news for all of us. I'm referring to the renewal of the mandate of Victor Mandrian. Thank you for all your work. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your mandate. You are incredible. You are amazing. So we are very happy. And so now we are to start. So this site event is the centrality of human rights to SDG 5 and Agenda 2030 is in collaboration also with the UN Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls and the LGBTI Stakeholder Group. So thank you also for all of you. In this side event, we would like to have a useful conversation on the importance of the centrality of the human rights to SDG 5 and Agenda 2030 and the coherency across the UN institutions and mechanisms. There are many topics that could be examined under the human rights and gender equality intersections. However, today we will focus on 4 specific dimensions that are relevant for our current context through the world. These 4 specific dimensions are, the first one is the policy coherency across the UN spaces and beyond. The second one, obviously, is sexual and reproductive health and rights with a specific focus on abortion. The third is women human rights defender, and the last one is anti-gender and anti-rights threats. So during this space, we would like to draw attention to the increasing attacks towards these dimensions, to provide recommendations towards progressing on these issues towards gender equality in the light of human rights, and obviously to stand in solidarity with feminists working on these issues through the world. To talk about all of this, we have an amazing group of speakers, also a big group of speakers, some of them here in person, others online. But before to start, I want to know that this is a feminist safe space for everyone here, as well as online, for people attending online. And because of this, we cannot tolerate any anti-gender or anti-rights comment here as well as online. So, because we really need and we really want to have a respectful and useful conversation today. So now, to start, I'm going. The side event have 3 blocks, different 3 blocks. I'm going to start with the first round of questions to our speakers. Each speaker has 5 minutes for the answer. And my first question is going to be to Melissa Upreti. Thank you, Melissa Petri. Melissa Petri is the chair of the UN Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls. She is from Nepal, based in USA. And Melissa, thank you for joining us today. And my question to you is about that we are observing an increasing disconnect between human rights and sustainable development. And Melissa, in your opinion, what do you think are the causes of this disconnection between human rights and sustainable development? The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Melissa.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd just like to start by thanking the co-organizers for hosting this event with us, and also colleagues from the Women's Major Group, and co-panelists, Siva and Victor, of course, who's the star of today. Congratulations on the renewal of your mandate. That's a big deal. So I'm very happy to be here to talk about a topic that's very close to my heart. As you can imagine, there's just so much to say. So I'm going to really try and pack this into the 5 minutes that you've given me. But since we are talking about the SDGs, and that's the focus, what I'd like to start with is really the premise that gender equality is not merely a standalone goal, but it is a key driver of sustainable development in all its dimensions. And yes, of course, I think we're all on the same page as far as that's concerned. And the systematic mainstreaming of a gender perspective in the implementation and monitoring of the Sustainable Development Goals is not a choice, but it's a necessity to really achieve the transformative potential of all of these goals. Now, there are progress reports that contain a call to, quote unquote, accelerate progress, address current blind spots, and prevent backsliding on the SDGs. We would add, as the working group, and really emphasize that it's crucial to reckon with a very well-funded and coordinated backlash against women's rights and gender equality if we do want to achieve these goals. It's not enough to just try to accelerate progress, but there's a backlash in play. Feminists have made great strides in the past decades. Since the 90s, Vienna, Cairo, Beijing, and a host of normative and institutional developments have happened through their advocacy on multiple levels. But now what we are seeing is a loss or losses that could take us all back by 100 years, if not more. And worse yet, these losses are going to fuel more losses. So the recent global pandemic has indeed deepened many existing inequalities, and we are still reeling from its effects. Meanwhile, the pushback has reached new heights, with women's and girls' rights not only being denied, but actively taken back. Now, since its inception, the working group, which is one of many special procedures, has drawn attention to crucial gaps and obstacles to achieving gender equality, ranging from the persistence of structural discrimination in all spheres to the rise of movements opposing the universality of women's human rights, or human rights in general, even. An unprecedented pushback against women's rights and gender equality has been progressing across different regions, led by conservative actors and their political allies. Now, we sounded the alarm pretty emphatically in 2018 in a thematic report titled Reasserting Gender Equality and Countering Rollbacks, in which we demonstrated that equality within the family and sexual and reproductive health and rights were the most affected by the backlash, they're the targets. In our 2021 report on sexual and reproductive health rights in crisis, we made the case for a multi-pronged strategy to advance women's and girls' sexual and reproductive health rights that includes eliminating discriminatory laws, increasing financial investment in essential services, and countering the pushback, among other measures. Now, what's alarming today is that the challenges we face to achieving gender equality or gender equitable, inclusive, and sustainable development have multiplied. The economic setbacks for women and economies more broadly are contributing to a rise in populism. Agreed-upon concepts such as gender are being more frequently challenged in an attempt to water down existing norms and legal protections. And we're seeing this happen with alarming frequency. Misinformation is being spread to create a moral panic by framing efforts to advance gender equality as the imposition of ideas and beliefs that seek to destroy institutions like the family, marriage, and religious freedom. And these attacks challenging the universality of human rights aim to weaken the protections to which we are already entitled under international human rights law, and many of which are actually reflected in national laws and constitutions. And they're contributing to the weakening of the human rights system as a whole. Now, women are not a monolithic group, and they are not one group in a long list of many vulnerable groups. They are half the world's population, if not more, and often most of the population in each vulnerable category. So advancing the rights of women must be a top priority with a focus on those most disadvantaged. Now, one of the weaknesses of the UN system, including its intergovernmental bodies and processes, is inadequate coordination and cooperation to the challenges faced by women and a failure to muster the political will to address the root causes of sex and gender-based discrimination and inequality. There is fragmentation, and a lot of work is done in silos. In addition to human rights being disregarded and the system being attacked, we also face the challenge of the lack of a supportive environment for our work. So we must continue to remind states of their binding legal obligations to ensure gender equality, sustainable development, peace, and security, to bring all of these together through the protection of human rights, especially in the current context of multiple crises, ranging from conflicts to disaster, many others that we are seeing converge in different places. And also the erosion of democratic institutions. I think that is another huge challenge. And we must insist that the goals, targets, and indicators of the 2030 Agenda are understood and measured using a human rights framework with a stronger focus on the fulfillment of women's and girls' human rights, especially those in situations of vulnerability. And there must be a greater focus on gender equality across the board. Otherwise, not only will the agenda falter, but with the pushback in play, come 2030, we will once again find ourselves far, far behind. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, for your amazing intervention. It's a must, the interlink between SDGs and human rights. If not, we can achieve the sustainable development. Thank you again. And now I'm going to move to our second speaker, who is one of our dearest members of the Women's Major Group, Siva Tanitran. Siva, she is the Executive Director of Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women, ARROW. She is based in Malaysia. And Siva, sexual and reproductive health and rights, especially the right to access to safe abortion, are one of the most contested groups of rights in our day. Could you tell us why a human rights approach to sexual and reproductive health and rights is important, and how we can further this via SDGs? Thank you, Siva, and it's your turn.
Thank you. I think that this question comes in light of Roe v. Wade and the overturning of Roe v. Wade in the United States. But I must say that this thing that you see in the United States has been a norm for many of the countries that we come from, which continue to restrict access to safe abortion on so many grounds, right? So globally, abortion is the only medical procedure so highly regulated, in the world, with 24 countries completely prohibiting abortion on all grounds. Why the right to abortion is so highly contested needs to be understood as control of women's reproductive role in society and how this is defined, and controlled as being part and parcel, the root of patriarchal oppression. Traditionally, the state, religion, and the medical profession have been pivotal agents in controlling access to safe abortion and also contraception, because that's the other side of the coin, right? And in instilling the discourse that it is criminal, sinful, immoral, and abnormal for a woman to have reproductive autonomy. So I want to make it clear that very often the reduction of access to safe abortion is only the lever issue, that is utilized to break public opinion on reproductive rights. In fact, the key aim is to take decisions around reproduction and sexuality away from women and place that power to make decisions and choices in the hands of the state, the church, and male authority figures in the family, that is the father and the husband. This is why within the SDGs, one of the first targets is to ensure that legal frameworks are in place to ensure equality and non-discrimination for women. If we take this view as a foundation, for the basis of equality and non-discrimination, for all of the following indicators, whether the issue is bodily autonomy and bodily integrity, land inheritance, or equality in the family, right? So this revamping of the legal framework and the normative framework is critical. So human rights conventions and institutions have characterized restrictive abortion laws as a form of discrimination against women. Because men do not need abortions, this is why the formulation of an anti-abortion law is considered discriminatory. That is, denies a group of persons who need a service from that very service. In the field of SRHR, it is very clear how we can apply this. For example, period poverty is experienced only by menstruating persons, right? Antenatal services, safe maternal delivery services, postpartum services are required only by pregnant persons who give birth, right? Just as safe abortion services are. So contraceptive services on the surface, we can say, oh, it affects both men and women. However, data across the world, when we look in depth into contraceptive methods, only 2 male modern methods exist. These are condom usage and vasectomies. And almost 95 to 97% of all contraceptive methods are targeted to women, right? And so women, and not only women, a certain type of women actually are able to access those services. So hence, not only laws on abortion, but laws and policies on health, education, labor need to take this into account when developing the laws and policies to ensure equality and non-discrimination. On abortion specifically, the human rights approach teaches us, and the state, hopefully, it teaches us and the state, because how denial of safe abortion impacts the quality of life of a pregnant person and infringes upon all other human rights as an individual. Treaty body jurisprudence, and of course Melissa is an expert in that, has indicated that denying women access to abortion can amount to violations of the rights to health, privacy, and in certain cases, the right to be free from cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment. And this we can see in the CEDAW reports and the utilization of the CEDAW mechanism. Ensuring access to these services in accordance with human rights standards is part of state obligations to eliminate discrimination against women and to ensure women's right to health, as well as other fundamental human rights. We have seen this with many cases across the world, not only in the US, whether it's children who are raped and forced to be pregnant, suffer. There are many to whom this pregnancy is detrimental to their health and will either experience that lifelong morbidity or die or commit suicide from that trauma. Pregnant persons who may have wanted and desired the pregnancy, but whose fetus is just simply not viable, also require the procedure, right? So women cannot be, in today's world, drugs such as misoprostol and methotrexate are also used to induce an abortion as well as treat other diseases and conditions. And yet, some of these drugs or purchase of these drugs will be denied to women on the basis that they can be used for abortions. So this is simply preposterous. So it's all women's access to these drugs for other health conditions can be cut off by such a law, right? So this is why these kind of anti-abortion laws are completely dangerous for a variety of ways. Within the context of the SDGs, that stands for Sustainable Development, yes, 1 minute, and leaving no one behind, denial of access to safe abortion impacts both achieving gender equality and the health goals, right? So let me give you a very simple example. Reducing maternal mortality will not be possible without providing access to safe abortion services, right? So the ongoing regressions to accessing abortion information and services become barriers to achieving SDGs, mainly SDG 3 and SDG 5, and contest human rights which are already enshrined in human rights frameworks. I mean, nobody needs to be reminded by this. All of this work has been done, has been put forth for like decades, right? So let's not tiptoe around the fact that indeed the overturning of Roe v. Wade is a major blow to the reproductive rights of women, girls, and pregnant persons across the world. And its ripple effects will embolden the anti-abortion groups globally. To fulfill the 2030 agenda, governments and civil society must accelerate actions to repeal laws that criminalize people who seek abortion or who in other ways exercise their sexual and reproductive rights. And we need to place within the SDGs this access to safe abortion within the spectrum of SRHR and advocate for decriminalization, legalization, accurate information, and availability of abortion. You can see in targets 5.61 and 5.62 that when they talk about reproductive rights, we are only talking about contraceptive access, But if we are looking at reproductive justice mechanisms and what all the most marginalized and vulnerable populations need, I can tell you that we need not only access to contraception, access to methods of abortion, we need maternity leave, we need childcare in place, So if we want to talk about reproductive rights in its fullest extent, these two indicators are just not adequate. So we need to think of how a human rights approach is going to bring a holistic understanding of how a person's reproductive rights can be fulfilled. And I know my time is up, so I will yeah.
Thank you, Siva. Thank you, Siva, for your intervention. It's really that we are under attack around the world. The right to the abortion is under attack in Europe, in USA, in Africa, Latin America. And it's something linking to white supremacy, to cut the democracy. Yeah. So we have to be ready to confront this attack. So thank you for your intervention. And now I'm going to move to our third speaker, who is virtual. He's Félicité Doyougbu. He is executive director and co-founder for the Association d'Acteurs de Développement based in Cameroon. Can you hear us, Félicité?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you, Félicité. Thank you. So, Félicité, as a women human rights defender, and a grassroots feminist activist from Cameroon, can you speak more to the issues faced by women human rights defenders on the ground, and what do we human rights defenders need from the states? Thank you so much, Félicité, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for giving me the floor. And I will express myself in French because French is my working language. Alors, bon après-midi à toutes et à tous. Merci de me passer la parole. C'est un honneur pour moi de prendre la parole dans cet espace dédié au side event du Women Major Group à l'occasion du High Level Political Forum sur les ODD. Je remercie déjà le Women Major Group d'avoir pensé à donner la possibilité aux jeunes de s'exprimer par ma voix. Alors, pour parler des problèmes auxquels font face les femmes défenseuses des droits humains, je vous prie de me permettre d'utiliser la notion de droit de l'homme et non pas droit de l'homme, qui parfois en français peut prêter à confusion. L'anglais me semble avoir la notion la plus adaptée qui est human rights. Lorsqu'on traduit en français, ça donne droit de l'homme et parfois on est victime.
Excuse me, Félicité, excuse me. We don't have translation today because we have some technical problems. So please, can you speak in English in order to all people here can understand you? Sorry for that.
I'll try.
Apologize.
My English is not perfect, but I'll try.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll try. So I was saying that to speak about issue faced by women defenders. I would like, first of all, to say that globally there is a lot of work that has been done by state, by the United Nations to promote and protect women defenders' rights. But on the field, there's still some gaps. There are a lot of gaps that still need to be handled or to be addressed. So, as a human rights defender, one of the first challenges that we have is intimidation, harassment, kidnapping. It's always difficult to work on the field with the state, with the community, with families, because as a woman, I am first of all in such of difficult situation because I'm a woman, but when I add women defenders in my statue, it's become more challenging for me because people always think as women defender, we want to take power to the men, we want to destroy the society, and sometimes people take it really badly, and they can even attack us on the street. So we are always scaring when we are walking around, when we are in a community trying to sensitize, raise awareness of women and even men to understand the importance of bring the gender mainstreaming in all the projects or all the actions that we are taking in communities. So it's really, really difficult for us. In Cameroon, for instance, since 2016, we are having a crisis in the northwest and in the southwest of Cameroon. And since that period, women rights defenders are always exposed into kidnapped, they are violated, some are even raped. So we have been pushing, we have been trying to stand and keep fighting to at least fight for our rights, and even for women's rights, which is not always easy. And this year's one of our elder sister, Maximilienne Ngombe, received Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Prize of Women of the Human Rights, and she's one of the great women defenders that we have here. So we, despite the issues, the challenges that we are facing, we are doing our best to do the work, and we really call states to protect women, to put in place a kind of mechanism that can urgently react when women defenders are harassed, attack, or even rape. We also call states to protect our families, because like our families sometimes are involved in what we are doing. So That's what I can say from now. And I hope that with the question, I can give more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felicite. And as a women's major group, we give great importance to the justice, the language justice also, but for technical difficulties, did not allow us to provide translation. So apologize again for this, and thank you so much to move to another language, to second language in this case. Thank you so much for this. Felicite. And now we are moving to the third speaker, to the last speaker of the first block or round of questions. He is Víctor Madrigal. Everybody knows who is Víctor Madrigal. We are very happy to be Víctor here with us. But Víctor is the UN independent expert on protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. The mandate is the SOGI mandate. As ESOGI mandate, you have an unprecedented and extremely important mandate. And as LGTB and feminist movement well know, SOGI often faces the most backlashes from anti-gender and anti-rights actors. So, Victor, please, can you speak more to these anti-gender and anti-rights threats and how we should address them? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to be here. I'm very happy to be with you today. And I think that many of you have worked with me before. You know that I don't have the habit of saying things that others can say better, particularly when it's women that are saying it better. My Twitter feed always says, oh, what she says, because, you know, and so what they have said, I would say absolutely. And I really, I'm not being cute or trying to be cute when I say that. I think it's fundamentally important that I acknowledge that throughout the last 4 years and a half, the voices that have shaped the approaches of the mandate have been the voices of women. And it is extremely important for me to acknowledge that. I mean, I'm very happy that I have been a conduit for many of those claims and evidence. And so that's what I can contribute today is the overview that I have gained in relation to that. And I'm going to do that very humbly because I want to share with you that this is the first time that I'm in this forum. And perhaps what I can share with you at the beginning is that it's a bit mind-boggling to me that I have been able to be the independent expert for 4 years and a half, and yet I have never felt a gravitational pull towards the high-level political forum. And that gravitational pull has been the demand of organizations. I see some of you here who kindly but insistently actually made the point that it should happen. And I think that it reveals something about how deliberate the plan to ensure that a human rights-based approach and developmental approaches are kept apart as a philosophical and as a methodological approach to things. And I know that we all know that there's a divide between Geneva and New York and the kitchen and the restaurant. We're not going to repeat that now. But what I would like for us is to go a little bit deeper into what are the consequences of that divide, where it is possible to actually formulate 9 reports on situations of violence and discrimination and have that squarely not have had a gravitational pull towards a forum like it was today. To me, that was actually quite surprising today, and I'm a little bit trying to process what that means in terms of the methodology of a mandate that has tried to link with these issues. When I carried out the exercise of formulating my research agenda for the last 3 years, it became very apparent to me that highlighting the importance of gender-based approaches was a fundamental part of that agenda. And as you know, I've carried out an inquiry as to how those approaches have been received in international law. And I think they have been firmly received in international human rights law and international human rights approaches that include, of course, non-discrimination and empowerment and participation and accountability. That, to me, is what a human rights-based approach is. I heard bits and pieces of that today as discussions were going on, but I didn't hear it systematically taken through that methodology. And in particular, given the voluntary nature of the accountability mechanisms, I wonder to what extent one can extrapolate at all, or where this is actually part of the gap analysis in what is missing, because I think that the implementation of those aspects of a human rights-based analysis and the approach actually would give a lot of the answers in relation to what is missing. And I would say particularly, I heard a lot about empowerment today, but I didn't hear a lot about participation effectively as a result of that empowerment. I also heard a lot of public policy and plans of formulation, but I did not hear a lot about the evaluation of what those plans have actually yielded in terms of impact. We're now halfway through the period of implementation. We have 7 years to go. And to me, the question was, how is it that the elements of that approach would resist the test of being examined? And that was the reason, and this is what I have a point, eventually, which is that that's the reason why I chose to do my last report on health and examine how the right to health and SDG 3 actually correlate in terms of the approaches that are implemented by states and by those that analyze the work of states to actually analyze the delivery. And of course, I do that through the lens of the gender-based approaches that I have recognized in my work, but I do it very much in connection with sexual orientation and gender identity. And as it came about, of course, one can only conclude that the elements and the targets, as I said in my presentation today, have great interconnectiveness with other including, of course, 5, which in its cross-cutting, to use that word that I know many don't like, call. But I also think that it immediately reveals where the gaps are that would need to be fulfilled if we're going to move on to a 2030 goal that really is, leaving no one behind or attempting to leave no one behind. I don't know how many of you will have been able to see my report on health, which admittedly was very late. I apologize for that. The idea is that I went through the targets, and at each and every time I found that the most disadvantaged of the populations and communities are the ones that are completely invisible in the voluntary national reviews, in the formulation of particular targets. So we're talking, of course, of lesbian women, we're talking about trans men, we're talking about bisexual women, and clearly there's a connectivity there with the absence of progress that can be tangibly felt in relation to SDG 5. I think that this working theory is valid for other identities that intersect to create experiences of discrimination. And I think it brings very, very coldly the idea, or coldly, in a very rotund and robust way, the idea that there is also this connection between discrimination and violence against lesbian, bisexual women, trans persons, including trans men, and this deliberate attack on bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive rights. And I'll share with you one last reflection in relation to this. I know that this is all over the place, but I have often felt that the reason why the attacks and the instrumentalization of trans lives is so vicious at the moment and so acute is because their existence, I think, represents a fundamental proof that complete departure from biological determinism is possible, and that happy, fulfilled, happy lives are possible in absence of any trait of predetermined roles, as was being alluded this morning. And I think that this is the reason why trans women specifically, and also trans men, are in the forefront of the attack in such a particular way. And I think we need to pay attention to that. not because the numbers are different, but because I actually think that there's a particular methodology that we need to understand in relation to that. Just like there is a particular methodology to ensuring absolute invisibility of lesbian women and bisexual women in data. There is a deliberate methodology to those issues. And this is what I wanted to bring out in relation to what I was able to formulate on this report on health. I will now enter into my listening mode, where I just want to hear whether these approaches make any sense and what in them needs to be changed. I'll finish in a happy note. I am very heartwarmed today because of the renewal of the mandate. I will continue serving these communities, populations, and peoples, my communities, populations, and peoples. And I would like to invite you very warmly to help me steer it. The voices of women, and I said, I have been since the very first day a fundamental part, and I also want to very warmly invite you to help me steer it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Victor, for your powerful words and inspired words. Thank you so much. And now we are moving to the second round of questions for our speakers. We are going to ask all of you the same question, and we will follow the same order as in the previous block. And also you have 5 or less because the time is running. So 4 minutes to answer the question. My question to all of you is, within the current context of the intersecting crises, such as rising anti-rights movements, militarism, climate crisis, and a global pandemic, what are the strategies and the best practices that governments, the United Nations, and also the civil society can implement to achieve SDG 5 and the human rights of women, girls, and LGBTQ plus population? Thank you so much. And Melissa, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a very important question, and obviously we only have a few minutes each. The first thing, I guess, that comes to mind is when we were working on our report on sexual and reproductive health rights in crisis, it occurred to us to also look to see how many constitutions around the world have very explicit language on sexual and or reproductive health and rights. And we discovered that there are probably around 12. Not a very exciting number when you consider the number of countries, but we thought, well, at least there are 12, because I think what has just happened over a week ago, what happened recently also showed us that there's incredible value to words. And in the context of the law and legal frameworks, if something is not explicitly there, it's constantly, it is debatable, right? It's always questionable, it's always challenged. So I would say when I think about what's happening, the kinds of issues that we're working on and the current context, striving towards something like that is very important. I think because, sexual and reproductive rights have historically been so attacked and stigmatized and vilified, it's not easy to talk about these issues in, different spaces. This is a safe space, so we can be very explicit about things. But I know even growing up, we didn't talk about these things. We didn't talk about these issues at all, let alone, these topics as rights. And I think it's really important to not only secure the protections, but really change the discourse, that we need to have these very bold aspirational goals where we say these rights deserve the highest possible legal protection. And for a nation, for a country, a constitution is that key document. It doesn't solve the entire problem, but at the same time, it has incredible legal value, symbolic value, and it can be the starting point for a whole lot more. Nepal is a country that comes to mind. I'm not being biased, I'm from there, but if you look at what has happened in Nepal since 2002, so over the last 20 years, we had a criminal ban on abortion. Actually, when I moved to this country, there was a criminal ban. Since then, we liberalized abortion, so we made it legal on broad grounds. We brought litigation to secure the recognition of the right to abortion as a constitutionally protected right. In the meantime, there was a civil war, basically, civil unrest. So we had the opportunity, well, Nepal actually drafted a new constitution. So we advocated very strongly for inclusion of language in the interim constitution itself, because we figured if we get language in the interim constitution, we'll at least have a placeholder, so that when the time comes for drafting a constitution, when that process happens, it'll be much easier for folks to, reiterate that and keep it in. And I'm so glad that we did that. And this happened in a context where initially the interim constitutional committee that was formed didn't even have a single woman. Women in Nepal came out on the streets, demanded the inclusion of women in that body, and the women who were brought in were allies of ours, became allies. We got language in the interim constitution. In the meanwhile, a case was filed through public interest litigation. We got the right recognized as constitutionally protected. So when the time came to draft the Constitution, those who drafted it had, a Supreme Court decision as a basis to say, wait a minute, this is worthy of constitutional recognition. It is a legitimate claim. And then we had the interim Constitution. And then we got a new Constitution, but we didn't stop there, because we knew that we have to build a legal and policy infrastructure around this right that is now written on paper to operationalize it. So folks got together, drafted a robust reproductive health law. It's actually a safe motherhood, sort of oriented law, but has very clear provisions on abortion and many aspects of abortion in that. And in that process, we also engaged with the Ministry of Finance to make sure that there would be funding for the law, there would be actual budget lines. So over the course of about 12 years, there was a fact-finding mission actually in the beginning, fact-finding, advocacy for legal reform, incredible mobilization, and the framing of denial of the right to abortion or the criminalization of abortion as a form of discrimination. That was the framing that was used. And activists drew very heavily from discussions, what they had learned in Cairo, Beijing. I mean, Nepal was a monarchy ruled by a king up until 1990. So in the early 90s, like when all of these conferences happened, activists were exposed to all of that, emboldened by that. And, a lot of that reflected in the national discourse, became part of it. The turning point was when a 14-year-old girl who had had an abortion was sent to prison for abortion, sentenced to life. And so, that really shocked the public conscience. So a number of things happened, but what I take away from this is really just, having the bold aspiration of having protections for reproductive health and rights in the Constitution, being relentless, organizing, working together, working constructively with the government, and not just one ministry, the Ministry of Health, but law, justice, finance, because now we also have a budget line in the national budget for abortion services. And so continuing that work, introducing a national health law. And of course, there are still some gaps. There's more work to be done, because implementing legal standards and ensuring a constant flow of resources is not easy. But I think what's happened over a period of about 20 years is just absolutely incredible. So I think a lot of lessons to draw from there in terms of organizing as well as normative developments, the kind of discourse, the framing, because now that right is pretty well protected, although there have been efforts. There are ongoing efforts to undo it. But I think that's the best, a good practice that I would like to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, for sharing these good practices. And now we are moving to our colleague, Siva. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I also wanted to say that they didn't forget, because this is one of the countries that I've been to that every year there is an annual Safe Abortion Day observed by the country, where people march for it. So we cannot take these rights for granted, right? So that continuous mobilization, the continuous reminder of why that is important needs to be there in the public imagination and the public mind. So, and I wanted to actually come from what Victor was saying, because very often, as I said, inside the SDG framework, we have, reproductive rights. but the control of reproduction is closely related to the control of sexuality, right? And for years, because I mean, like, I write these regional reports myself, and I know that as early as 1994, the language for sexual rights was already introduced inside the early drafts of the Cairo document, and yet has been deliberately left out, right? Because of the kinds of binaries that we are forced to choose, in reporting mechanisms. And these binaries exist because they're actually a tool of the state, right? The productive and reproductive labor of men and women are controlled in so many ways. And so the non-binary, challenge that assumption, right, that your body has to perform certain types of productive and reproductive labor. And that's the framing, of national societies that, people in power or authorities don't like that to be contested for, their own benefits and reasons. So, we need to I think as civil society, organize around that bigger framework that we see, that human rights enables, that human beings can have both rights and development benefits, that they don't have to, go into these different spaces. For me, I feel like this is actually really critical at this point, because when the 2015 agenda, the post-2015 framework was discussed, we're all in all of this anxiety about inequalities, and we said, oh my God, these development frameworks, they have made a more unequal society, and what is that? And we try to put these SDGs to address the inequalities, but today in 2022, I'm very sad to say that our world is in a worse situation than we were in 2015. Right? And every time when we see these rising inequalities, and we've lived through COVID, and now the turbulent global situation, in such crisis, we as the women's movement, the feminist movement, we're told, let's solve this before we get to that. Right? This is what we're always told, and that acts at any, whether it's a national context or a global context, right? It can be authoritarianism, it can be corruption, it could be a democracy crisis, pandemic, whatever, right? But always something called a crisis. You know why? Because the crisis makes us think short-term thinking. Instead of long-term thinking, right? But if we look at it as, just like you said, like gender equality, the human rights of women, girls, and non-binary person, it cross-cuts across all of these crises. Right. And if we start it, whether it's a war, a disaster induced by climate change, a famine due to food supply, it is we who suffer these crises the most, right? So we already know this. So the solution is in our groups. Right? And yet we are told that the solution is outside of this group. Right. So I think that in whatever we try to solve, we have to come to bring the attention back to these vulnerable, these marginalized groups, because that actually tells us a lot about that system we operate in. And tackling what these marginalized and vulnerable groups, I know we have not talked about migrants yet, but migrants are a huge issue. Indigenous populations are a huge issue. But why are we not talking about them? Because our system is built on the exploitative labor and the exploited land rights of these groups, right? So this is why we don't discuss it inside our framework of change. So I feel like one of the things is our ability to build solidarity, and we have done that and operate that, from historically, right? I think if we can do that, that would be the best. And that includes having very important conversations with each other. We can see, even today, certain subjects are used to divide the women's movement and the trans movement. And we have seen this repeatedly occurring over the last 4 or 5 years, whether it's bathrooms, whether it's sports, and now even the abortion debate. If we really look at it, whoever needs an abortion service needs to get it, regardless of whether you're a married woman, an unmarried woman, a girl, a trans man, or a trans woman, right? Regardless. If you need it, you need to get it. There should be no exceptions to that. That's what the human rights approach means. Yeah. And yet, we are made to battle across, so we have to find more bridges of solidarity. And that we have to consciously cultivate and intentionally cultivate in the work that we do. And not all of us may not succeed all of the time, but I feel like if we are open to saying, yeah, maybe I made a mistake there, but let's now try to build a bridge, I think that would be far more useful.
Thank you so much, Siva. So Felicite, it's your turn. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you once more. I think that the question is very important. And today, I don't think the mainstreaming of gender is still a necessity. For me, it's an emergency, because when we are looking on what we are facing today, many crises, it just make me think that it's urgent for us to do our best to meet the SDG 5, because women have a lot of competencies, and it's so unfortunate that our society is still keeping them silent. Our society is still hiding their competencies. But I think what women rights defenders can do, it's just amazing. Like last year, women in Cameroon, with the women rights defender from civic society, organized the first convention, women convention for peace in Cameroon, because like I said, since 2016, two of our regions are in crisis, and women came together to call the state, the secessionists, for a dialogue. It was not easy at all. We faced a lot of challenges, intimidation, but we did it. And I do think that we really need to give the opportunity to women to bring on the table their know-how, because women defenders, right defenders, have a lot of things to share, because on the ground they are always in touch with the community, and they know more about the needs of the grassroots communities. So for me, I think it's important for states to establish an effective and inclusive gender-sensitive protection mechanism, so that when, as a woman rights defender, I am doing my job, I can feel safe, because it's not always easy to do the work, because you are exposing yourself, trying to protect or to sensitize communities. So it's really important for the state to do that. And also the state should see how to work with the civic society and all the stakeholders to put to place an emergency response mechanism. Because sometimes when you went to a police to complain because of an harassment or intimidation, they will never really take you seriously. They don't react quickly, and it does not really cost a lot for you to maybe lose your life or to be locked into custody, because like for nothing, they can just come to your house or to your office and hold you and bring you to the police station. So it's really, really important to see how the states and civic society can work together and put to place a kind of emergency response mechanism. And also, states must take seriously and promptly investigate when there are intimidation, threats, violence, and other abuse against women rights defenders. They should also create a safe space where we can easily access to protection. We can have meaningful participation in a decision-making process, because all the time we are just kept behind. And we also need a protection for our families as women rights defenders. The United Nations has been promoting the Leave No One Behind. We do think that at this point, we have to stop talking and just start acting. And start acting is to just turning the promises into action. So I will end by this. We need really to turn the promises into action so that we as women rights defenders can be doing our job and contribute for the sustainable development goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felicité. And now we have arrived to the end of the first part of our site event. So thank you very much for all the speakers. And now is the time to open the space for the interventions from the floor. We have different speakers, different colleagues around the world. All of you have 3 minutes, just 3 minutes for intervention. So please stick to limit, and please introduce yourself when you speak. I'm going to move to Sonia Correa. Thank you, Sonia. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi, I'm Ludena.
Huh? Thank you. It's your turn.
Victor.
Nice to see you.
Good afternoon, even good night for some of those who are in the room or virtually. I want to begin by thanking the Women's Major Group for the invitation for today's conversation. And also to have the great pleasure to congratulate Victor, but also all of us, I would say, for the renovation of the mandate. It's sort of an auspicious day. It was a chance, but that's very good in such a somber time that we live. My brief contribution to the panel today is grounded on what I have learned, or we have learned, from researching anti-gender cyclones that have swept over Latin America, in dialogue with researchers engaged in the same exercises in Europe, but also the US. I want to make a parenthesis saying that what I bring may not apply in the same manner to other regions of the world, but is very relevant for the regions I have mentioned. And my first observation that I think we need to recognize that although anti-gender politics became flagrantly vicious in the last 10 years or so, its genealogy is much longer. It must be retraced back to the same rooms where you are today during the 1990s conference when the first fierce attacks on gender erupted in the road from Cairo to Beijing. But still, we have to go further back to the 1970s when a reconfiguration began that would deeply transform what I call the political economy of conservatism. I think that the challenges we confront today in our areas of work that we have been discussing have unfolded from this long trajectory. In that sense, they are a backlash, but they are not a backlash, simply a backlash, but the result of this long trajectory that implied a politics that produces new realities. We are confronted with these new realities, the productive politics. Second observation, this reconfigured conservative politics is multifarious. As I have written many times now, it is like a hydra, an animal with many heads moving in very distinct directions, targeting multiple issues: feminism, gender, abortion, gender in education, same-sex marriage, trans rights, most principally now, as Victor has reminded us. This implies that the human rights frame and politics able to respond to this challenge must be decidedly intersectional. I think that the reports and the work done by Victor in the last few years has used rigorous intersectional approach across the various domains of the mandate. The same applies to the work done by the working group, and it's wonderful that Melissa is here. Yet, I would finalize by saying that, in my view, we still need to work more. We need further elaboration to expand this intersectional frame more consistently, in particular in relation to articulation between abortion or reproduction on the one hand and gender identity on the other, along the same lines that Siva has underlined in her intervention. From a Latin American perspective, we cannot delink anti-gender politics and anti-abortion politics. And the best illustration of that is perhaps the policies of the Brazilian government since 2019. And I think that more strikingly, the urgency of expanding and deepening this intersectional frame is found in the announced extension of the judicial reasoning beneath the nefarious overturning of Roe versus Wade of June 26th to also legally challenge marriage equality, as well as the right of persons to engage in same-sex relations. I don't have time, but I would say that another area where more work on intersectionality is needed now is the articulation between gender equality and the attacks on gender and in the education. This is a whole area that I think also allows perhaps for a better articulation between human rights and development. It's really my expectation that we may jointly work towards this agenda, this challenging but very necessary agenda, as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, Sonia. We are always learning from you, always, every single day. So thank you so much. And now we are going to our colleague, Chan Perez from Filipinas. He's here to talk about connecting women, human rights defenders, sexual and reproductive rights, and policy coherency. Chan, the floor is yours.
Space. I would like to speak on the flight of WHRDs and echoing Felicity's message. My name again is Chan Perez. I come from the Philippines, a country where it is dangerous to be a human rights defender. It is a place where it is so easy to be on the list of the military's order of battle merely for voicing democratic demands for jobs and livelihood, access to land and resources, for voicing our demands for sexual and reproductive health and rights. WHRDs in our country continue to be victims of political attacks. Many are terror tagged, arrested, criminalized, and even killed. Since 2016, at least 62 WHRDs became victims of political killings, and at least 134 are currently imprisoned. This is despite the many international and national commitments and several recommendations to the Philippine government under the Universal Periodic Review, under CEDAW, and under commitments in the SDGs to address violence against women and access to justice. WHRDs and women's human rights remain under attack. And this situation, I know, is not unique to us, but is happening in many other countries, especially with the resurgence of patriarchal authoritarian regimes. Despite this, us WHRDs continue to address and respond to the people's needs, especially amid the pandemic, from catering to community pantries, relief efforts, psychosocial services, addressing SRHR services during the pandemic. But alongside this, WHRDs also continue to participate in policy dialogues, but as we are seeing now, we are also continuously being sidelined in these spaces from the local, national to regional, and even in global levels. Many times ignoring our recommendations to address systemic issues that impedes the achievement of SDGs and human rights, women's human rights in general. We also see governments not delivering on the protection of WHRDs despite those international and national commitments. And this says a lot about a system that prioritizes profit over women and the people, and violence and impunity over justice. We must understand, and we know this, that WHRDs, many of us are leaders in our respective communities, farmers, workers, indigenous peoples, who are holding the solution to the current crisis that we are facing, since we are actually the ones who are facing discrimination and rights violations. We are also in the best position to put forward policy and program recommendations that would ensure our human rights. Thus, it is actually the government who should be seeking our participation, who should be supporting our participation in the implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of policies and programs that impact us. And of course, we need to demand that governments ensure a safe and enabling environment for the work that we are doing. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sham, for your clear and powerful intervention. Now we are moving to Jiska Ayu from the entity Yayasan Kesehatan PP1, and she's based in Indonesia. And the floor is yours, Jiska. Thank you.
Sorry, just to say we cannot hear anything, those of us who are online. The sound just died a couple of minutes ago.
Yeah, because Jiska can hear us. So we can continue.
It's back.
Okay, Mika, so we can continue with you.
Giska is on now. Yeah, with Giska.
Giska, okay, Giska is ready. Okay, Giska, okay. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. Well, actually, it's already evening here. My name is Giska. I'm from Women Health Foundation, and right here, right now, to Indonesia. Well, talking about achieving SDGs 5 in terms of sexual and reproductive health rights, and especially the importance of comprehensive sexual and reproductive education for young people, me as a woman who grew up in an environment that still uses a conservative perspective, still adhere to a patriarchal system that is also full of stigma, I have witnessed many cases happen related to gender and sexual and reproductive health, such as child marriage, unwanted pregnancy, unsafe abortion, discriminative environment, sexual violence, as well as gender-based violence, that these things mostly cause women and girls to become victims. As a human being, actually, sexual and reproductive health will come along with our life cycle, starting from we as a babies, toddlers, teenagers, or young people, even in our elderly phase. Therefore, comprehensive sexual and reproductive health education that also include of gender perspective becomes something that must be given to the community and all the people, especially to every young people, where in this period of time, young people are starting to explore, to recognize, to discover their sexuality. And also in this period, the entire reproductive system begins to be active and has an effect to our life. Well, actually, in the government itself, they already have several programs that focus on sexuality and reproductive health education for young people. But still, the implementation and distribution of this program remains a homework for all the parties and stakeholders. Providing comprehensive sexual education to young people must be adapted to young people's way and perspective, actually. It is also important to involve them in educating their peers, because young people are the best educators for young people. They can understand each other and see each other from the same point of view. Well, we usually call it as a meaningful youth participation. This involvement, of course, must be supported by a supportive environment around young people. Even though there are still so many people who think that sexual and reproductive health are only the responsibility of women, we have to understand that all genders must be responsible of their sexual and reproductive health. For this reason, the involvement of all communities, parents, adult male groups, religions, leaders, and community leaders must be present to contribute to increase the capacity of young people related to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Gita. And now, very quickly, because we don't have enough time to give the floor to Sachini Pereira from Resur to talk about the connection between CEDAW and SDGs. Thank you so much, Sachini.
I'll try to be very quick. I think one of the things we wanted to talk about was, and I'm from Realizing Sexual and Reproductive Justice Research, and the accountability piece, because I think what we are really seeing through the SDGs is that many of our countries who have been postponing their reviews in the treaty bodies have reported multiple times in the SDGs, right? And I mean, I won't name them here, but I have the list. So what does this mean, right? And what is this threshold that, allows them to actually prefer this? And at national level also, then we see activists struggling because the governments are now speaking the sustainable development language, and you're being told that rights and development are two different things. So one of the things that we as research, but also with the International Women's Rights Action Watch, ERO Asia Pacific, so we've been working with national activists to see how do we show strategic links between these frameworks so that we can drive more accountability and also expand the scope of not just the SDGs, but also the treaty bodies and the frameworks that we use there. So we've been developing methodologies and also supporting feminist and women's rights organizations who report in these different frameworks to make these links. So when you're going to CEDAW, to also be able to say, we see, these links with the SDGs, so that, we are communicating it to the governments, because usually in the governments, it's not even the same delegations who come to these different spaces, so it's completely divided. So that is one of the strategies that we have been using, and it's also a way to then also, see how do we really operationalize this idea of leaving no one behind, because it's just empty the way we see it being implemented in the SDG space. And I think one of the other things to also remember is on issues like climate justice, like one of the latest convenience we had was around climate justice, and we see that CEDAW, for an example, can gain a lot from the way climate justice is articulated across different goals in the SDGs. So it's not just about because I think a lot of the time we say accountability happens in the human rights frameworks, but in practice we see that it's still there is state obligation, but it's still governments are able to just say no, actually we're not interested. So how do we meet governments where they are, so if they're coming here, how do we bring this language? And I think the final point I want to make is I think with the SDGs, maybe we can stop talking about them as a replication or a dilution of existing rights. I don't know whether there is really whether there is a point in putting energy there, but how do we look at it as an instrument or a vehicle to accelerate progress? And because we see resources going into the SDGs, so how do we use that as use that momentum, if there is any left right now, but we have to build that momentum again, and how do we use it to make those linkages? Thank you.
Thank you, Sashini. And now, Mika Grisbrogwith, sorry for my pronunciation for your surname, from the Danish Institute for Human Rights, to talk about the SDGs and the protection of human rights defenders. So, Mika, thank you for being here with us. And the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and don't worry about my last name. It's usually a very nice tongue twister in meetings. So thanks so much for having us. And so Majka Grzywnovich, Senior Advisor at the Institute. And my input is a tiny bit different, and I wanted to suggest and propose some tools that the Institute created to help a bit of that conversation, and also some of the long-term thinking and strategic work that Siva mentioned. So I hope I can provide some tools to that. So since the adoption of the 2030 Agenda, we took on ourselves a bit rebellious role as a national human institution. We decided to create tools and resources demonstrating the linkages between human rights and SDGs, and showing that only by using the integrated approach we could fully succeed. So when it comes to the work around protection of human rights defenders, there are two things that I wanted to mention, two resources that we created linking the human rights and SDG framework. So the first one is a report, a resource showing concrete links between states' human rights obligations and their commitments under the 2030 Agenda in relation specifically to securing an enabling environment for human rights defenders. And it uses the set of rights and freedoms incorporated in the UN Declaration of Human Rights Defenders and connects them with the SDGs, demonstrating their interdependent nature. And we choose the declaration here because this is the only and most comprehensible framework available for the support and protection of defenders. And even though it's not legally binding, it reaffirms rights enshrined in legally binding international instruments. So, and also, as we know, it is a key enabler for the effective implementation of the whole 2030 Agenda. And now to a very specific tool that is in the making, and some of you are very familiar with it and also participate in further development of it, is a monitoring tool, Right to Defend Rights monitoring tool. And this is specifically based on the SDG 1610, and specifically with its global indicator 16.10.1. And I'm sure everybody in the room knows that this indicator measures the most serious violations and killings of human rights defenders. What it doesn't do is it doesn't allow for more granular and nuanced monitoring of structural, procedural, and administrative issues needed to be in place to secure a safe environment for human rights defenders. So In that context, using the methodology developed by OHCHR to create human rights indicators, the Danish Institute, in cooperation with OHCHR and an expert reference group, have developed complementary human rights indicators and an online data collection tool to specifically, exactly, comprehensively monitor progress on the enabling environment for human rights defenders based on human rights standards. And that it also links to specific SDGs at the same time. So we have 61 indicators in 5 categories, and the indicators are divided in structural, process, and outcome indicators to measure state commitments, efforts, and results in terms of furthering and protecting the environment for defenders. And the tool is being piloted, is going to be online soon, available for everyone. So I hope we can share that further through the Women's Major Group. Yeah, so that's what I want to say. I know that we're running out of time, so I'm not gonna do analysis, but thanks a lot for having us.
So thank you, Mika, for sharing this powerful tool. We will waiting for this. And also, I would like to thank for every speaker, to every person attending our site event. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your analysis, your ideas, strategies, tools. All of them, I'm sure we support us in our daily current work in order to overcome this context and also this crisis. So thank you again very much for all our speakers and the rest of colleagues attending our site event. Thank you and take care.
Gracias a vos. Que trabajamos siempre muy difícil.
Creo que vamos demasiadas, pero muy bien.